I never imagined that a simple coffee order could unravel a multi-million-dollar empire and expose the raw, hidden cracks in my own soul. It was a Tuesday, a day like any other, bathed in the crisp, indifferent light of a New York City autumn morning. The air outside was a biting chill, but inside the Gilded Bean, a high-end coffee shop I frequented near my office in Midtown, the atmosphere was a cacophony of hushed power plays and the comforting aroma of single-origin Colombian beans. Richard Vance, CEO of Vance Innovations, a tech titan on the verge of a groundbreaking acquisition, felt invulnerable. My bespoke Italian suit, a deep charcoal grey, felt like a second skin, an armour of success. The weight of my Rolex Daytona, a gift to myself after our last Series C funding round, was a comforting reminder of my achievements, solid and undeniable. Across from me sat Arthur Hayes, a shark in a pinstripe suit, representing the board of the company I was about to acquire, Apex Solutions. Arthur was a stickler for details, a man who believed in absolute preparation. He was precisely the kind of man I respected, because he played the game by my rules, ruthlessly. Our merger was the talk of Wall Street, poised to make Vance Innovations a dominant force in the AI-driven analytics market. The final sign-off was scheduled for 10 a.m., just an hour away, in the gleaming glass tower that housed my corporate empire. This coffee meeting was merely a formality, a polite pre-game huddle before we signed the papers that would forever cement my legacy. The waitress approached our table, her uniform pristine, a stark white apron over a simple black dress. She had a calm demeanor, almost serene, a stark contrast to the buzzing tension in the room. Her name tag read Eleanor. I barely glanced at her, my eyes still fixed on the intricate data projection scrolling across my tablet screen. "I'll have my usual," I stated, my voice modulated, confident. A double espresso, ristretto shot, lightly frothed oat milk on the side, served in a pre-warmed demitasse. It was a precise order, one I had fine-tuned over years, a subtle power play in itself. It communicated without words that I knew exactly what I wanted, and I expected nothing less than perfection. Eleanor, however, paused. Her eyes, a striking shade of hazel, met mine briefly, a flicker of something unreadable there. Not defiance, but perhaps a quiet consideration. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice soft but clear, "forgive me, but we've just received a fresh batch of the Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. Its bright citrus notes might complement the intensity of your ristretto better than your usual blend this morning. It's particularly fresh, roasted just yesterday." I felt a slight annoyance prickle at the back of my neck. Was she questioning my choice? My usual blend was perfect. It was my usual. I gave her a dismissive wave. "Eleanor, I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm quite particular. Stick to the usual. We have a very important meeting this morning, and I don't have time for culinary experiments." My tone was polite, but firm, leaving no room for argument. Arthur, ever the diplomat, offered a small, almost imperceptible smile, clearly amused by the exchange. He ordered a simple black coffee, no fuss. As Eleanor turned to leave, I leaned closer to Arthur, dropping my voice conspiratorially, not caring if she overheard. "See, some people just don't listen," I chuckled, shaking my head slightly, referring to the lack of attention to detail I often encountered in the service industry, implicitly contrasting it with the precision required in Mai's world. The corner of my mouth twitched upwards, a hint of a smug grin. The remark was meant as an aside, a light-hearted jab at the general populace, a subtle reinforcement of our shared superiority in the corporate food chain. But as Eleanor walked away, her back ramrod straight, I felt a peculiar, fleeting chill, an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, as if my words had carried more weight than I intended. It was an odd sensation, quickly dismissed. I had more important matters at hand than the sensibilities of a coffee shop employee. This morning was about legacy, about expansion, about proving, yet again, that Richard Vance was always a step ahead. The deal with Apex Solutions wasn't just another transaction. It was a testament to years of relentless work, cutthroat decisions, and an unwavering belief in my own vision. Every acquisition, every successful product launch had been built on a foundation of anticipating market shifts, outmaneuvering competitors, and most importantly, making sure my voice was the loudest, the most authoritative in any room. I truly believed that listening too much, especially to dissenting or unconventional voices, was a weakness, a distraction from the clear path to dominance. I opened my tablet again, reviewing the final numbers, the projections, the meticulous legal boilerplate. Arthur across from me was doing the same, a quiet hum of digital activity filling the space between us. The clinking of porcelain, the low murmur of conversations, the rhythmic grind of coffee beans from behind the counter, all faded into a background white noise, a distant world from my high-stakes reality. My focus narrowed, sharper than any razor's edge. This was my moment. This was my win. I was in control, or so I thought. If this beginning already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead, leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few dare to show. The coffee arrived, exactly as ordered, precise and potent. Eleanor placed the demi-tasse before me with a quiet efficiency, the oat milk in a tiny, perfectly polished pitcher beside it. I added a splash, stirring the dark liquid with a miniature spoon, my mind already miles away, anticipating the complex negotiations and legal jargon of the impending meeting. Arthur took a sip of his plain black coffee, his expression unreadable. "Ready for this, Richard?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. Apex has been a tough nut to crack. Their founder, Dr. Anya Sharma, is notoriously protective of her intellectual property. Anya is brilliant, no doubt, I conceded, my gaze sweeping over the bustling coffee shop, not really seeing the individual faces, but rather the collective hum of urban life that served as a backdrop to my own grand narrative. But every brilliant mind has its price, Arthur. Or failing that, a weak point. Our offer is more than generous, and we have leverage. Their recent dip in Q3 earnings, the whispers about a core algorithm patent that's nearing expiration, it's all factored in. I tapped a finger against my tablet screen, bringing up a projected graph. The data tells the story, Arthur, always. And our data analysts are the best in the business. We've dissected Apex Solutions from every angle. I'd always prided myself on my analytical prowess, my ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to identify vulnerabilities and exploit them with surgical precision. My rise had been meteoric, driven by an almost pathological dedication to facts, figures, and an unshakable belief in the supremacy of logic. Emotions, to me, were variables, dangerous and unpredictable. They were best left to artists and poets, not to men who built empires. My father, God rest his soul, had been a craftsman, a master carpenter. He'd always told me that the greatest strength lay in listening to the wood, feeling its grain, understanding its inherent weaknesses and strengths. I dismissed it as old-world sentimentality, charming but ultimately impractical in the cutthroat world of venture capital and disruptive technology. I believed he hadn't listened enough to the market, which was why his workshop, once a bustling hub, slowly faded into obscurity, a casualty of changing times. A sudden, sharp memory flickered in my mind, a micro-trigger that momentarily pulled me from my corporate focus. It was of a stormy afternoon years ago when I was just starting Vance Innovations. We were working on a critical software patch, a bug fix, that threatened to derail our first major product launch. A junior developer, fresh out of Stanford, had nervously approached me, suggesting an unconventional approach to the code, a detour, he called it, claiming it would address a deeper underlying instability that my senior engineers had overlooked. I was in a hurry, stressed, and completely absorbed in the immediate crisis. I barked at him, told him to stick to the protocol, to trust the established architecture. "We don't have time for creative coding, Mark," I'd snapped, my voice laced with impatience. "Just fix the bug as instructed." He'd wilted, his face paling, and returned to his station. We launched the patch, and it seemed to work. For a week. Then the deeper instability he'd warned about manifested, causing a cascading system failure that cost us valuable clients and nearly sank the company before it even got off the ground. It was a close call, a scar on my otherwise pristine track record, a minor setback I quickly overcame with ruthless damage control and a series of all-nighters. I'd fired Mark, of course, for insubordination, for trying to reinvent the wheel when speed was paramount. I convinced myself it was his lack of experience, his naivete, not my refusal to listen, that had caused the problem. It was a lesson, I told myself, in trusting your instincts, in delegating, but ultimately in leading with an iron fist, not an open ear. That incident, long buried under layers of subsequent successes, resurfaced now, a faint, unsettling echo. I pushed the memory aside. Sentimentality was a weakness, regret an indulgence. I took another sip of my espresso, the bitterness of familiar comfort. Eleanor passed our table again, carrying a tray of used cups, her movements fluid and quiet. She glanced at me, and this time her gaze seemed to hold a fleeting sadness, a knowing depth that was entirely out of place for a coffee shop waitress. It was barely a second, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but it registered, a discordant note in the symphony of my self-assured morning. I frowned slightly, confused by her expression. Had she overheard my earlier comment about not listening? Or was it just my imagination, a projection of my own subconscious unease? I dismissed it quickly. My imagination was probably overactive due to the caffeine and the high stakes of the upcoming deal. People, especially those in service roles, often had looks. It was part of their job, I presumed, to project a certain air, whatever that might be. My world was about data, about tangible outcomes, about things that could be quantified and controlled. The subtle nuances of human emotion, the fleeting expressions of strangers, these were inconsequential distractions. Arthur cleared his throat, pulling me back to the present. So, the final details. We need to ensure that the intellectual property transfer is ironclad, specifically the patent for their neural net optimizer algorithm. Our legal team flagged it. It's expiring in 6 months, not 9, as initially stated in their preliminary documents. A critical difference for our valuation. My heart gave a slight, almost imperceptible lurch. 6 months, not 9. That was a substantial discrepancy. My legal team had caught it, but I hadn't internalized the full implication. A patent expiring 3 months earlier meant significantly less time to integrate and monetize it exclusively. It eroded a small but significant portion of our projected ROI. I cursed silently, realizing I had skimmed over that particular legal note, focusing instead on the broader financial terms. I prided myself on attention to detail, but this one had slipped through. You ever had a moment where you thought you had it all figured out, only to realize you missed a critical detail? Tell me in the comments, what was that moment for you? The 6 months, not 9 detail hung in the air, a small but insidious poison. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a deal-breaker, not yet, but it was a complication I hadn't fully prepared for. It meant renegotiating some terms, potentially giving up a little more equity, or worse, having Arthur use it as a point of leverage against me. My reputation for meticulousness was on the line. I quickly brought up the legal document on my tablet, scanning the fine print, my fingers flying across the screen. Yes, there it was, buried deep in Appendix C, a tiny footnote referencing a recent amendment. Damn it! I'd focused on the headlines, the big numbers, assuming my army of lawyers and analysts had handled the minutiae. My hubris, for a fleeting second, felt like a palpable weight. Eleanor appeared again, this time to clear our empty coffee cups. As she reached for my demitasse, She paused, her eyes, those same discerning hazel eyes, flicking to my tablet screen. I instinctively angled the device away, a sudden surge of protectiveness over my sensitive corporate data. "Anything else, Mr. Vance?" she asked, her tone neutral, almost too neutral. "No, thank you, Eleanor," I said, a touch curtly, eager for her to leave so I could fully process this new complication. I needed to formulate a strategy, a counter-argument, a way to spin this minor oversight into an advantage. This was where I excelled, turning lemons into a multi-million-dollar lemonade stand. As she moved away, I heard her murmur something, almost to herself, as she picked up Arthur's cup. "It's always the fine print, isn't it? The quiet details that scream the loudest in the end." She didn't look at me, but her words seemed to pierce through the hum of the cafe, landing squarely in my lap. Was she deliberately trying to needle me? Or was it just a coincidence, a common observation? My logical mind told me it was the latter, but an unsettling sensation gnawed at me. The way her gaze had lingered on my screen, the uncanny timing of her comment. It felt too specific. I dismissed the paranoia. She was a waitress, not a corporate spy. My mind raced, trying to find a solution. I needed a new angle for the negotiation. What if I could argue that Apex's lack of transparency about the patent expiration date actually devalued their company, making them the deceptive party? It was a stretch, but I was good at stretching truths into compelling narratives. Arthur, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying my discomfort, a subtle smirk playing on his lips. "It seems we both have our homework cut out for us before the signing, Richard," he remarked, a glint in his eye. "Dr. Sharma is known for her tenacity. She won't let a detail like that slide, especially when it impacts her company's valuation." "Tenacity is a quality I admire, Arthur," I replied, forcing a confident smile, though my stomach churned. "But so is pragmatism. The market waits for no one. Apex needs this deal as much as we do, if not more, to shore up their investor confidence." My thoughts drifted back to the fragment of an old text message, an almost forgotten piece of communication from my estranged father, Daniel Vance. He'd sent it years ago, long before his passing, when I was celebrating my first big corporate win. It read, "Son, remember that true success isn't just about winning, it's about building. And you can't build anything strong if you don't listen to the foundation, the little pieces, the subtle shifts. The best carpenters feel the wood. They don't just hammer nails." I'd scoffed at the time, seeing it as another one of his quaint, artisanal metaphors irrelevant to the digital age. I'd sent back a brief, almost robotic reply about market dominance and scalable solutions. He had never replied to that one. Now, his words echoed with an unnerving resonance. The little pieces, the subtle shifts, the foundation. Was the patent expiration one of those little pieces I had neglected to truly listen to feel? I closed my eyes for a brief moment, picturing my father's workshop. The smell of sawdust, the comforting thud of a mallet against chisel, the quiet focus in his eyes as he worked on a delicate joint. He'd always said that wood had a voice, and you had to listen to it, understand its history, its knots, its grain, to truly master it. I remember scoffing at him once, when I was a teenager, declaring that wood doesn't talk, Dad. It's just wood. You mold it to your will. He'd just smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and continued sanding. He was a man of quiet conviction, too quiet for the likes of me, I suppose. I'd craved the roar of the crowd, the clinking of champagne glasses, the thunderous applause of a successful IPO. His quiet craft, his methodical attention to seemingly insignificant details, felt like a slow death sentence compared to the exhilarating rush of the tech world. The contrast between his philosophy and mine had always been stark. He built things to last, piece by painstaking piece. I built empires to disrupt, to scale, to conquer. And in my world, listening too much to the individual voices, the wood's voice, as he called it, felt like a constraint, a drag on progress. You had to make decisions quickly, decisively, often unilaterally. There was no time for careful contemplation of every splinter. My phone buzzed, pulling me sharply back to the present. It was my assistant, Chloe. "Mr. Vance, legal just sent over an urgent amendment regarding the Apex Solutions patent. Apparently, there was a miscommunication earlier this week regarding the exact expiration date. It's definitely 6 months. They apologize for the oversight." The official confirmation, delivered with a polite, digital apology. The cold reality solidified. This wasn't a minor oversight anymore. It was a potential point of contention that could derail the smooth execution of my carefully orchestrated plan. The clock was ticking, and I needed to pivot quickly. This sudden twist, where the details matter more than the big picture, is something we all face. Have you ever received a warning you ignored, only to regret it later? Share your story below. The miscommunication was a bitter pill to swallow. I had always prided myself on having the most informed intelligence, the most reliable data. This was a crack in my carefully constructed facade of infallibility. I felt a surge of irritation, not just at my legal team, but at myself for not scrutinizing every single line item. This was a classic Richard Vance mistake from my earlier, less polished days. A reminder of the arrogance that almost cost me everything. The memory of Mark, the junior developer, and his unheeded warning about the software instability flashed again, sharper this time. It wasn't just about patent dates, it was about a pattern, a blind spot I had cultivated over years of unchecked success. Arthur, sensing my internal turmoil, cleared his throat. "Well, Richard," he said, a touch too casually, "it seems we'll have to adjust our valuation expectations slightly. Dr. Sharma will certainly leverage this. Perhaps we consider a small increase in the cash component or an accelerated vesting schedule for her core team's equity." He was already strategizing, using my oversight as a bargaining chip against me. The nerve. "We'll see about that, Arthur," I retorted, my voice regaining its steel. "There are other ways to negotiate. Apex needs us, not the other way around. Their recent quarterly reports haven't been stellar. They're vulnerable." My mind was racing, trying to find an angle. What if I could convince Dr. Sharma that our rapid integration process would negate the shorter patent window? Or frame it as a mutually beneficial acceleration of their technology's impact? It was a gamble, but I loved a good gamble when the odds were stacked against me. I decided to pivot. Instead of conceding, I would go on the offensive, emphasizing Apex's current market fragility. As I formulated my new strategy, Eleanor approached our table again, this time with a small, discreet note card and a pen. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice still quiet but with an unexpected hint of urgency. "My apologies for interrupting, but I overheard your discussion about the Apex Solutions patent. I couldn't help but notice. You mentioned the neural net optimizer algorithm?" I bristled. "And I appreciate your attentiveness, but our business discussions are private." My tone left no room for ambiguity. I was already stressed, and the last thing I needed was a curious waitress getting involved in sensitive corporate information. She didn't flinch. Her hazel eyes held my gaze unwavering. "I understand, sir, but I used to work for Apex Solutions. In their R&D department, actually. Before it was acquired by the current leadership. My name then was Sarah." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah. The name hit me like a physical blow, reverberating through my skull. Not Eleanor. Sarah. My sister, Sarah. The sister I hadn't seen or spoken to in nearly 15 years. The sister who had vanished from my life after a bitter family dispute over my inheritance. A dispute fueled, I now realized, by my own callous dismissal of her contributions to our father's legacy, and my absolute refusal to listen to her vision for modernizing his failing business. I had accused her of being sentimental, of clinging to the past, of lacking the ruthless pragmatism needed to succeed. I told her she didn't listen to market realities. I had cut her out, emotionally and financially, believing she was a weak link, a drain on my ambition. My carefully constructed facade of calm shattered, exposing a raw nerve. The bustling cafe, the clinking of cups, the murmur of voices, all faded into an indistinct blur. Only Eleanor, or rather, Sarah, stood in sharp focus, her presence now radiating an unexpected power. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a ghost from my past, a living embodiment of my deepest regret, standing right in the heart of my triumph. Arthur, oblivious to the earthquake shaking my world, raised an eyebrow. "You worked for Apex, Eleanor? Or Sarah, as you say? Interesting, small world." He clearly thought she was just trying to impress us, perhaps angling for a better tip or a job referral. I couldn't speak. My mouth felt dry, my throat constricted. Sarah, here, now, working as a waitress. After all these years, the shame, the guilt, the shock, it all swirled together in a maelstrom of emotion threatening to drown me. My sister, the one I had actively pushed away, the one I had deemed unworthy, was standing before me, holding a tray of used coffee cups and telling me she knew about the very company I was trying to acquire. What do you mean? You worked for Apex?" I finally managed to stammer, my voice a strained whisper barely recognizable as my own. My eyes darted around the cafe, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable, as if everyone was now privy to the crumbling of my perfectly curated life. Sarah's expression remained calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the tempest raging inside me. "I was one of the original developers for the neural net optimizer. Dr. Sharma and I co-authored several of the early papers. I hold a percentage of the original intellectual property rights, a small percentage but significant, especially now that the patent is nearing expiration and its value is being reassessed." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a small percentage, this was a bomb. If she held even a fraction of the IP rights, and the patent was indeed nearing expiration, her consent or lack thereof could throw a massive wrench into the entire acquisition. She wasn't just a former employee, she was a critical stakeholder, a phantom limb of Apex Solutions, a hidden billionaire in her own right, quietly observing me from the sidelines. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, far more potent than any espresso. Richard Vance, the man who always saw every angle, every vulnerability, had been completely blind to the most crucial one. Can you imagine that shock? To realize someone you dismissed holds the key to your entire future. Have you ever had a past decision come back to haunt you in such a dramatic way? Let me know in the comments below. The air thickened, crackling with an unspoken tension that only I seemed to fully grasp. Arthur, still processing the surface-level revelation, chuckled nervously. "Well, isn't that a twist? So you're telling us you were part of the Apex story from the beginning?" He was clearly trying to gauge if this was a bluff, a calculated move, or a genuine surprise. His corporate instincts, however, were already kicking in, a predatory glint in his eyes. He must have been calculating the implications, the potential costs, the renegotiations. But I wasn't listening to Arthur. My gaze was fixed on Sarah, my sister. The years had etched subtle lines around her eyes, but the determined set of her jaw, the quiet strength in her posture, was undeniably hers. The same strength I had once dismissed as stubbornness, as a refusal to conform to the real world. Now that strength felt like an immovable mountain in the path of my ambition. The image of her, apron-clad, serving coffee, while quietly holding a critical piece of my deal, was a surreal, humiliating tableau. "Sarah," I choked out, the name tasting foreign on my tongue after so long. Why are you here? Why are you a waitress?" The questions tumbled out, unrefined, driven by a desperate need to understand the magnitude of this cosmic joke. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, devoid of humor, laced with a quiet sadness. "After everything, Richard, where else would I be? You always said I wasn't cut out for the corporate world, that I was too emotional, too attached to sentiment. You made sure I had nothing left of Dad's legacy. So I reinvented myself, and sometimes," she paused, her gaze steady, "the best place to truly observe the world, to understand its true mechanisms, is from the edges, from where people think you don't matter, from where they don't listen." Her words were a direct echo of my earlier dismissive comment, a carefully aimed arrow straight to the heart of my arrogance. My mind reeled. All those years I had convinced myself that she was struggling, perhaps even a failure, proof that my path had been the right one. I had buried the guilt under layers of success, under the relentless pursuit of more power, more money, more recognition. And now here she was, not a failure, but a quiet force, a silent observer who had not only survived, but thrived in her own way, securing a valuable stake in an emerging tech company. The full weight of my past actions, my cruel dismissal of her, my absolute refusal to engage with her perspective during our family's darkest hours, came crashing down on me. I thought back to the will, to the small, unassuming workshop that had been our father's pride and joy. I'd argued vehemently that it was a decaying asset, a financial drain, and pushed for its liquidation, dismissing Sarah's impassioned pleas to turn it into a community art center, a place where people could learn traditional crafts. "Sentimentality, Sarah," I'd roared. "It's a business. There's no market for artisanal woodworking anymore. We need to be rational." I'd called her naive, unrealistic, and ultimately made sure she received a minuscule share of the overall estate, arguing that her vision was economically unsound. I effectively cut her off, forcing her to sell her remaining shares in our father's dormant holding company to me at a rock-bottom price, convinced I was doing her a favor, freeing her from a doomed venture. Now her small percentage in Apex Solutions, a company with groundbreaking AI, felt like a deliberate act of quiet defiance, a strategic move she had executed while I was busy in my gilded cage, oblivious. It was a stark reminder that while I had been focused on the grand gestures, the market-shaking deals, she had been cultivating something of genuine value, something that existed outside my narrow worldview. Arthur, finally catching on to the deeper implications, shifted in his seat. "So, Sarah, you hold IP rights to the neural net optimizer? What exactly does that entail, legally speaking?" His voice was now cautious, his shark-like facade replaced by a calculating wariness. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "It means that while Apex Solutions holds the primary patent, any significant licensing or sale of the technology, especially as it approaches public domain, requires a specific clause to be activated, one that grants me a royalty stream from any future commercialization or a significant buyout of my stake. It was a contingency I insisted upon when I left, knowing how valuable the foundational research would become. And while I never pursued it actively, content with my new life, if the company is being acquired, especially by someone who dismisses the value of listening to the small details, then perhaps it's time to ensure those details are properly compensated." She glanced at me, a pointed emphasis on the "dismisses the value of listening" phrase, a subtle but devastating blow. The table was completely turned. My entire strategy, my entire deal, now hinged on my estranged sister, the woman I had scorned and discarded. The very deal I was so confident in now felt like a house of cards, built on a foundation of my own monumental arrogance. The irony was exquisite and utterly crushing. This is the kind of revelation that changes everything. If you were Richard, facing your past mistakes embodied in such a powerful way, what would be your first move? Share your thoughts. My mind raced, trying to find an escape route, a loophole, any crack in this sudden, unassailable wall Sarah had erected. I was a master negotiator, a deal closer. But this wasn't a negotiation. This was an ambush, a reckoning served with a side of oat milk. The power had irrevocably shifted. The one who hadn't listened was now completely at the mercy of the one he had silenced. The moral conflict wasn't just looming. It was here, stark and undeniable, laid bare in the bustling, indifferent coffee shop. "Sarah," I began again, my voice now devoid of its usual power, laced instead with a desperate plea. "We can talk about this. Privately. This is a multi-million-dollar acquisition. Your stake, whatever it is, can be significantly monetized. We can discuss a fair buyout, a substantial sum." I trailed off, trying to appeal to the financial logic I always assumed guided everyone. I still saw her through the lens of my own values, believing money was the ultimate motivator. She shook her head slowly, her eyes still fixed on mine, seeing right through my calculated offer. "It's not about the money, Richard. Not anymore. It's about what you said earlier, about listening, or rather, about not listening. About dismissing voices you deem insignificant, about believing that your perspective is the only one that matters." Her words were a cool, surgical incision, cutting through my layers of self-deception. "I spent years watching you, brother. Watching you build your empire, watching you dismiss everyone who didn't fit into your grand design. I saw how you treated Dad's legacy, how you erased my contributions, how you convinced yourself that your way was the only way." The weight of her words settled heavily upon me, a lead blanket suffocating my breath. I had tried to erase her, not just from my life, but from the narrative of our family's history, from the truth of our father's business. I had painted her as the dreamer, the sentimental one, the one who didn't understand business. And now that dreamer held the critical leverage over my most significant business venture. The humiliation was profound, deeper than any financial loss. Arthur, meanwhile, seemed to have shifted his allegiance. Seeing an opportunity, he cleared his throat. "Sarah, perhaps we could arrange a meeting with our legal counsel, separately from Mr. Vance. It would be beneficial for all parties to understand the exact nature of your contractual rights regarding Apex Solutions." He was already trying to isolate her, to turn her into a new asset for his own strategic gain, subtly undermining my position even further. The corporate world was a brutal ecosystem, and I was, for the first time in a long time, the prey. I felt a surge of cold fury at Arthur, but it quickly dissipated, replaced by the gnawing realization that I deserved this. Every single bit of it. I had created this monster of arrogance, and now it was devouring me. My father's words echoed again. "You can't build anything strong if you don't listen to the foundation, the little pieces, the subtle shifts." Sarah was one of those little pieces, a foundational element I had not just ignored but actively shattered. I looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for the first time in years, seeing not just a waitress, not just a threat, but my sister. The sister who had once braided my hair when we were kids, who had comforted me after my first schoolyard fight, who had shared secrets under the covers late at night. The memories flooded in, unbidden, unwanted, but undeniably real. We had been close once, before ambition and greed had driven a wedge between us, a wedge I had personally hammered in with my relentless pursuit of power. "What do you want, Sarah?" I asked, my voice raw, stripped of its usual smooth veneer. It was the question of a man truly desperate, truly facing his ultimate downfall. She took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "I want you to listen, Richard. Truly listen, for once in your life. To understand that there are values beyond market share and profit margins, that people, their contributions, their quiet insights matter, and I want you to acknowledge what you did to Dad's legacy and to me, not just with the money, but with the dismissal, the disrespect." Her voice remained calm, almost mournful, no hint of triumph, which somehow made it even more devastating. She wasn't seeking revenge, but recognition, and that was a price I wasn't sure I could pay. The choice was clear, yet agonizing. I could fight her, unleash my legal team, try to discredit her, but that would only prolong the agony, expose my family's dirty laundry, and likely derail the Apex acquisition altogether, costing me untold millions and destroying my reputation. Or I could humble myself, admit my past wrongs, and try to make amends. But that meant admitting I was wrong, that my entire philosophy had been flawed, that the very foundation of my success was built on a painful personal injustice. It meant dismantling the carefully constructed persona of Richard Vance, the invincible CEO. This is the core of the dilemma: pride versus potential ruin, acknowledging past wrongs versus doubling down on arrogance. What would you do if your entire future depended on humbling yourself before someone you'd wronged? Let us know in the comments. The silence that followed Sarah's words was deafening, amplified by the bustling sounds of the cafe that now felt like a distant, irrelevant hum. The weight of her gaze, the quiet strength in her posture, was a crushing force. My meticulously crafted world, built on years of ruthless ambition and an unwavering belief in my own infallible judgment, was crumbling before my eyes. The coffee shop, once a symbol of my daily routine, my controlled environment, had become the arena of my undoing. Arthur, ever the opportunist, tried to interject. "Richard, we need to consider the implications here. Perhaps we can make a separate offer to Sarah discreetly to mitigate the—" But I cut him off, my voice barely a whisper, yet firm enough to silence him. "No, Arthur, this isn't about mitigating, this is about confronting." My focus was solely on Sarah. The memory of our last argument, a furious shouting match in my father's empty workshop, flooded back with vivid clarity. I had stood among the silent tools, the scent of wood and memories thick in the air, and told her she was a fool for clinging to a dying trade. "There's no future here, Sarah, only dust and sentimentality," I'd yelled, my voice echoing in the hollow space. She had looked at me with a pain so profound it had momentarily silenced even my booming arrogance. "You don't understand, Richard," she'd whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't just wood, this is heart, this is legacy, and you're just going to tear it all down for a quick buck." I'd dismissed her, of course, confident in my own superior vision, and proceeded to liquidate every last piece of the workshop, selling off antique tools and raw materials for a fraction of their worth, believing I was making a sound financial decision. And now, here she was, the embodiment of that disregarded legacy, holding the fate of my modern empire in her hands. The deep moral conflict twisted inside me, a serpent coiling around my heart. Could I admit, after all these years, that she had been right, that my relentless pursuit of progress had blinded me to something more profound, something that transcended balance sheets and market capitalization? Could I choose conscience over capital, humility over hubris? The choice was agonizing, not because I feared the financial loss, though that was immense, but because it meant admitting a fundamental flaw in my very being, a flaw I had carefully hidden even from myself. It meant shattering the myth of Richard Vance, the infallible CEO, the man who always won. My gaze drifted to the window, to the blur of yellow cabs and rushing pedestrians. It was a typical New York scene, relentless, unforgiving. My empire was built on that relentlessness, on cutting through the noise, on focusing solely on the bottom line. But Sarah's presence, her quiet defiance, her unwavering truth had brought a different kind of silence to my world, one that forced me to listen to the echoes of my own past. "Sarah," I began again, the words feeling heavy, each one a step down from the pedestal I had erected for myself. I was wrong. About a lot of things. About Dad's workshop. About your vision. About you. The confession felt like ripping off a band-aid, painful and raw, but also, surprisingly, a breath of fresh air. I let my ambition blind me. I thought that success meant cutting off anything that wasn't immediately profitable, anyone who didn't fit into my definition of progress. I didn't listen. I never truly listened. And I'm deeply, truly sorry for what I did to you, for what I said, for erasing your place in our family. The words, once unthinkable, now flowed, a torrent of long-suppressed guilt and shame. Arthur looked stunned, his jaw slightly agape. He had clearly expected me to fight, to bargain, to unleash my legal hounds. This naked vulnerability was completely out of character for the Richard Vance he knew. Sarah's expression softened, a glimmer of the old warmth I remembered from our childhood flickering in her hazel eyes, but it was quickly tempered by a lingering sorrow. "It's a start, Richard," she said, her voice still measured. "But an apology doesn't change what's done. It doesn't rebuild what was torn down." She wasn't forgiving me instantly, not fully, and I knew she shouldn't. The wounds were too deep, the years of silence too long. "No," I agreed, my voice thick with emotion. "It doesn't, but perhaps we can try to rebuild something. Together." I looked at her, truly seeing her, seeing the strength, the intelligence, the quiet resilience I had so arrogantly dismissed. "What do you want, Sarah? Not just financially. What would it take for you to reconsider your position on the Apex acquisition? To allow this deal to go through, and for us to perhaps begin to mend what I broke?" This was my moment of ultimate internal conflict. I was offering not just money, but a piece of my empire, a piece of my pride, a piece of my very identity. It was a choice born not of logic, but of a profound, painful, emotional realization. I was ready to destroy my fortune, or at least significantly diminish it, for a chance at redemption, for a chance to salvage what was left of my soul. I was willing to confess my fault, not just to her, but implicitly to the world, if it meant truly listening, truly changing. Sarah considered my words, her gaze sweeping over my face, searching perhaps for any lingering trace of the old arrogance. The cafe around us had returned to its normal hum, but for me, the world had shrunk to this table, to this one crucial interaction. It felt like an eternity before she spoke again, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a newfound authority, an almost regal command. "The Apex acquisition," she began, "can proceed, but not under the original terms. My stake, as you now understand, is significant. I will agree to a buyout, yes, but at a valuation that reflects the true market potential of the neural net optimizer and the additional 3 months of exclusive usage you originally factored in. And that valuation will be negotiated, not by your legal team alone, but with my own counsel present, and with transparency that you often neglected in the past." She paused, letting the financial implications sink in. "This would mean a substantial hit to my profit margins, a significant recalculation of the deal's value, perhaps even causing the board to question my judgment." But she wasn't finished. "And beyond the numbers, Richard, there's a condition. You will commit a significant portion of your future philanthropic efforts through Vance Innovations to supporting community-based initiatives that promote hands-on craftsmanship, art education, and small sustainable businesses. Projects that, like Dad's workshop, might not seem profitable on paper, but foster creativity, resilience, and connection." Her eyes held a challenge, a test. Was my change of heart genuine, or merely a strategic retreat? "You'll invest in the little pieces, Richard, the ones you always dismissed as sentimental, and you'll do it by listening to the communities, not just dictating terms." The conditions were steep. Financially, it was a significant concession. Morally, it was a direct challenge to the core tenets of my past success. But as I looked at her, I saw not a threat, but a path. A chance, however slim, to redefine my legacy, not just in terms of wealth, but in terms of impact, of actual human connection. The image of my father, his hands calloused from years of working with wood, flashed in my mind. He would have approved. He would have finally recognized the son he always hoped I could be. "I agree," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "To all of it." The words felt heavy, but liberating. The empire I had built was shaken, yes, but perhaps it could be rebuilt on a stronger, more humane foundation. Arthur, having silently witnessed this dramatic turn of events, finally spoke up, a reluctant admiration in his tone. "Well, Richard, that was unexpected, but strategically sound, I suppose. A costly pivot, but it saves the deal." He still saw it through the lens of business, but even he couldn't deny the power of the moment. Sarah gave me a long, searching look, a glimmer of hope in her eyes, mingled with a profound sense of loss that still lingered from our past. "Then let's get to work, brother," she said, her voice no longer a whisper, but a clear, resonant tone of a woman who had found her voice, and finally, someone willing to listen. I walked into the acquisition meeting that day, not as the invincible CEO I had always pretended to be, but as a humbled man, carrying the weight of past mistakes and the fragile hope of a future built on something more than just profit. The deal was signed, but the terms were different. My fortune was intact, but my heart had undergone a seismic shift. The acquisition was successful, but the victory felt hollow compared to the profound, painful reconciliation I had just experienced. Sarah became a consultant for Vance Innovation's new philanthropic division, ensuring that her vision for community development was truly integrated. Our relationship was fragile, a delicate sapling, but it was a start. The rich businessman had laughed, mocking the quiet waitress, confident in his own superiority. But it was the quiet waitress, my sister, who held the true keys to his future and to his past. She didn't seek to destroy me, but to awaken me, to force me to listen to the silent screams of the little pieces I had so casually discarded. And in the silence of my humbled ambition, I finally heard what truly mattered. If this content opened your mind, comment below, "I made it to the end." This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and hit the notification bell, because the next episodes will go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the continuation of this journey.